Hello everyone, Brad from the PDH Pod here, and first up, apologies for taking so long to get this gameplay video published. It was supposed to be done literally months ago. Either way, I'm here with Game 1 of my first Pauper Commander stream of 2024, yes, like I said, months ago. Before we get to the game, use the buttons below to like and subscribe, and remember to tune in to the PDH Pod podcast every Friday for more Pauper Commander talk. If you enjoy interesting games of Pauper Commander, then I have got a banger of a pod for you. With Golgari and Rakdos nonsense, a Zada deck that goes wide using walls, and some literal Rule 0 garbage, this is one of the fastest, most fun games I've played in a long time. First, let's get to those commanders to see exactly what sort of silliness everyone is up to this evening. First up, we've got Abby, the common commander, playing a Rule 0 deck with Garbage Elemental 82F from Unstable at the helm. Garbage Elemental is a 5-mana 6/5 elemental with Last Strike. This creature deals combat damage after creatures without Last Strike. And it also has Battalion. Whenever Garbage Elemental and at least 2 other creatures attack, target creature can't block this turn. Going second is Dave, the Alcadron Vader, a Pauper Commander Rules Committee member and one of my co-hosts from the PDH Pod podcast, and he's playing Zada, Hedron Grinder. And if you didn't know, Zada is a 4-mana 3/3 legendary creature goblin ally that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada, copy that spell for each other creature you control that spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. In the third seat is Dax, Perpetual Threat number 1, playing Akawalli the Seething Tower. Akawalli is a 3-mana 3/3 legendary creature fungus with Descend 4. As long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, Akawalli the Seething Tower gets +2/+2 and has Trample. And it also has Descend 8. As long as there are 8 or more permanent cards in your graveyard, Akawalli gets an additional +2/+2 and cannot be blocked by more than one creature. And rounding out the table and going forth is me, Brad Drake V, one of Dave's co-hosts from the PDH Pod podcast, and I am playing Spiteflame Witch. It's a 2-mana 2/1 non-legendary elemental shaman with the activated ability of play a black and a red, and each player loses 1 life. All 4 players resolve opening hands and mulligans, and we are underway. Abby draws a card to start the game, then plays a Smoldering Crater. It enters the battlefield tapped, so she passes the turn. Alcadron draws and makes his turn short and sweet by putting a desert into play as his land for turn. Then he casts a Steel Wall. He passes the turn after that. Dax draws for his first turn of the evening. He plays a Swamp and also casts a 1-drop creature in the form of Eye Collector. He passes it to me after that. I draw for my first turn. I also play a Swamp, but I have no turn 1 plays, so I pass the turn. Abby untaps and draws a card. They play a Great Furnace for turn, then tap both of their lands to cast a Guardian Idol, which enters tapped. They pass the turn after that. Dave untaps and draws to start his turn. After playing a Mountain, he passes the turn. Dax untaps and draws. He gets both his commander's colors online by putting a Forest into play, then taps both his lands to play a Glow Spore Shaman, which enters the battlefield tapped. It mills Dax for 3 cards, and he chooses not to put a land from his graveyard on top of his library. For Akawalli purposes, his graveyard is at 1 permanent. Dax moves to combat, swinging the Collector over at Alcadron. Upon damage, it mills everyone for a card, and this puts Dax's graveyard at 2 permanents. He passes the turn to me after combat. I don't need to untap, but I do draw for turn. I play a Mountain and tap both of my lands for a Fire Diamond, which enters tapped, so I have to pass the turn. Abby untaps everything and draws for turn. She plays a Study Hall as land for turn and decides to end her turn after that. Dave also doesn't need to untap, so he moves directly to his draw step. He plays another Mountain, then taps out to play a Wall of Spears. He passes the turn to Dax after that. Dax untaps and draws for turn. He plays a Terramorphic Expanse as his land for turn, then moves directly to combat. He sends the 3/1 Shaman at me and the Eye Collector at Dave again. We declare no blocks, take our damage, and the Collector mills everyone for another card. This round of mill was particularly painful for the rest of the table, and Dax's graveyard goes up to 3 permanents. Choosing not to play anything post-combat, he passes the turn to me. I untap my lands and rock and draw for turn. My land for turn is another Mountain. Then I pay 3 for a Brimstone Trebuchet. I move to pass the turn, but Abby casts a big score to draw a couple cards and make some treasure tokens. My turn is passed after that. Abby untaps and draws to start the turn. She plays a Desert of the Fervent as her land for turn, then chuckles at playing a mono-red deck that has no mountains in play on turn 5. She doesn't need mountains to cast her commander, though. She taps everything and uses a treasure to put the last striker into play. In response, Dax cracks his Terramorphic Expanse to put a swamp into play tapped, and bumps his graveyard up to 4 permanents. Abby passes the turn after that. Dave untaps and draws for turn. He plays another mountain, then taps everything to play his commander Zada. Moving to his end step, Dax swamp cycles a Gloomfang Mauler to go fetch another swamp to hand and raises his graveyard permanent count by another 1. Dax untaps and draws for turn. He plays that swamp for turn, then taps 3 to join in on the commander fun by casting Akawalli, which is now a 5/5. He moves to combat and repeats his attacks from the previous turn by sending the shaman at me and the collector at Dave. We declare no blocks again, and the collector mills the table for another card. Dax's graveyard goes up to 6 permanents, and he pees the tea after that. I untap everything and draw. I play a swamp for turn, then tap 2 to play a Kessig Flame Breather. I then pay 3 for a Sizzle, which deals 3 damage to each of my opponents and triggers the Flame Breather to deal another point of damage to everyone but me. After that expensive turn, I am tapped out, so I pass. Abby untaps and draws to start the turn. She moves directly to combat and swings the elemental at Dave. He blocks with Wall of Spears. Abby has no response to blockers, so all the various phases of combat damage are dealt. Second main phase, she pays 4 mana for an Atarka Efreet and then passes the turn after that. Dave untaps and draws for turn. He plays another mountain, then taps 3 to cast a Wall of Heat. He passes the turn after that, making it known that he's keeping the desert untapped because the Eye Collector has become somewhat of a nuisance. Dax untaps and draws to start the turn. He plays a forest, then taps 1 of each color for a Tithing Blade, which ETBs and makes his opponents each sacrifice a creature. In response, I tap my Trebuchet to deal a damage to each of my opponents, then I sacrifice it to the blade. Also in response, Dave casts Spawning Breath, targeting Zada. Spawning Breath deals 1 damage to target creature and creates a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token. By targeting Zada, Dave gets to ping all of his creatures and make 3 of those tokens. When Tithing Blade resolves, Dave sacrifices 1 of the newly made tokens to its effect. Dax then taps 2 mana to cast Over the Edge, and he chooses the first mode to have his commander explore twice. He puts the top card of his library into his graveyard twice, which puts 2 +1/+1 counters onto Akawalli and raises his graveyard count up to 8 permanents, which also gives his commander +2/+2 and can't be blocked by more than 1 creature. In total, Akawalli is now a 9/9 with trample. Whew. Dax moves to combat, sending the Eye Collector at Dave again, the Shaman at me again, and the Seething Tower over at Abby. We all declare no blocks and take our respective damage. Eye Collector also mills everyone for a card, including a couple of Dave and Abby's win conditions. Dax is in trouble now. He passes the turn after that. I untap and draw to start my turn. I start by paying 2 to cast Thrill of Possibility. It triggers the Flame Breather, so my opponents take a damage, and I discard a Fleshbag Marauder to draw 2 cards. I then tap 2 to cast a Trespasser's Curse, enchanting Dax. In retrospect, it should have targeted Dave, but what are you going to do? The curse triggers Flame Breather, and my opponents take a damage. I then tap my last land to cast a Blister Spit Goblin. I pass the turn after that. Abby untaps and draws for turn. She plays her first actual mountain of the game, then moves directly to combat, sending the Garbage Elemental at Dax for a little retribution. Dax has no response and no blockers, so Abby casts a Teamer Battle Rage, targeting her commander.
Oh, hello. Dax here. I bet you're wondering how I got into this situation. Let's take a moment to talk about Last Strike. If you give a first strike to a creature with Last Strike, it deals damage twice. Once during first strike damage, and one during Last Strike. Notably, in this instance, Garbage Elemental now has Double Strike. It now hits in all 3 instances of damage during combat. First strike damage, normal damage, and last strike damage. Triple strike! Isn't Rule 0 fun, kids? Now back to the show.
Dax takes a whopping 18 commander damage and is eliminated in 1 fell swoop. Second main phase, Abby taps 3 to cast a Blood Mad Vampire, then passes the turn after that. Dave untaps and draws for turn. He starts by paying 1 to cast Ryle, targeting Zada, which in turn targets all of his other creatures. They all take 1 damage, gain trample until the end of turn, and Dave draws 5 cards. He then pays 2 to cast an Aether Flame Wall. He passes the turn after that. In another bout of ill-timed maneuvers, I tap 2 to play my commander, then tap my gremlin to ping the table for 1 damage. I then pay 2 to cast Rain of Embers to deal 1 damage to each creature and each player. This spell triggers the Flame Breather, so everyone takes 1 damage, and my opponents take an additional damage. Rain of Embers also kills my commander. I go ahead and pass the turn after that. Abby untaps and draws for turn. She plays another mountain, then pays 3 for Whisper Silk Cloak and another 2 mana to equip it to the garbage pile. Abby moves to combat, swinging the elemental at me. Thankfully, the cloak gives Shroud, so there can't be any combat tricks. I can't block though, so I take a bunch of commander damage. Abby moves to pass the turn after that, but Dave casts a sudden breakthrough, targeting Zada to give his entire board +2 power, first strike, and make 4 treasure tokens. Abby's turn is officially ended after that. Dave untaps and draws for turn. He taps 5 total mana to play Thermo Alchemist and Unruly Catapult. He passes the turn after that. I untap and draw to start my turn. I tap 3 to cast a Syndicate Enforcer. Suffering serious mana shortages, I go ahead and move to combat, swinging 1 Kessig damage Abby's way. She can't block, so the damage is taken, and that's it for my turn. I pass. Abby untaps and draws for turn. She plays a mountain, then moves right to combat. The garbage elemental heads at Dave, and he declares no blocks. He takes his damage, and Abby passes the turn. Dave untaps and draws for turn. He plays a Cradle of the Accursed as his land for turn, then pays 3 to cast a Dragon Egg. He then taps the Alchemist and the Catapult to deal 2 damage to Abby and I. He pays 3 to cast Improvised Weaponry, targeting Zada. It deals 2 damage to each of his creatures, and he creates another 7 treasure tokens for a total of 11. This damage kills the Dragon Egg to put a 2/2 Flying Dragon token with Fire Breathing into play. Upon casting Improvised Weaponry, the Alchemist and the Catapult both untap, but he immediately retaps them to deal 2 more to Abby and I. Dave then spends 3 treasures to cast Bloody Betrayal, targeting Zada, which untaps his pingers. He taps them for a 3rd time for another round of damage to Abby and I. Bloody Betrayal untaps all his creatures, gives haste to all of them, and he creates 7 blood tokens. Dave moves to combat, sending the dragon token at me for a potentially lethal amount of damage. I have no way to block a flyer, so I am prepared to meet my doom. In response, though, Abby casts a Fiery Cannonade. With all of Dave's creatures having already taken damage due to the improvised weaponry, the Cannonade threatens to wipe his board clean. In response, Dave taps his pingers for another round of damage, then sweeps up all his creatures except for the Wall of Heat. He passes the turn after that. I untap and draw to start my turn. I play another Swamp, then do what this deck loves to do, spend all of its mana. I cast a Coal Hauler Swine and pass the turn after that. Abby untaps and draws for turn. She moves directly to combat and swings her commander at Dave. He declares no blocks and takes a handful of garbage damage. Second main phase, Abby pays 6 mana to cast an Ironhoof Boar, then passes the turn. Dave untaps and draws for turn. He starts by paying 6 mana to recast his commander, then sacrifices some treasures to play Gleaming Barrier and Torpid Moloch. Yes, Torpid Moloch, everybody. He passes the turn after that. I untap and draw for turn. I tap 4 mana for an Evankar's Justice without buyback, which triggers Flame Breather to deal 1 damage to my opponents. Evankar's Justice also does 2 damage to each of us and 2 damage to the Coal Hauler Swine, which in turn deals another 2 damage to the table. Dave and Abby are eliminated, and I escape with 2 life remaining. Congrats to me, I suppose, for the win, and a big thanks to the Big Pain Pig for helping me pull off the W. Thanks for watching until the end of the video, everybody. Check the links in the description below, and now go play some PDH. Peace.